If you work municipal dispatch in a town under 4,000 people, you learn the breathing patterns of the regulars. You know who calls when the snowplow clips their cedar hedge, and you know who calls when their furnace pilot goes out and they have no one else to talk to. Between November and February in Hornepayne, the radio room is mostly dead air and coffee scald. We ran the whole board out of a concrete annex attached to the Public Works shed on Front Street. Just 2 consoles, an ancient CAD terminal, and a bell trunk line that picked up hum every time the temperature dropped past -30. Around mid-January, we started getting these 10-second misdials on the non-emergency line. Not silent calls. You de-pick up, say your line, and you'd hear a voice reading out what sounded like furnace model numbers or utility meter tags. 3 digits, a street name that didn't exist in our grid, and then a click. The first 4 times, I logged them as line bleeding from the railway repeater down by the CN yard. It happens when the cold cracks the insulation on the copper pairs. The OPP sergeant came by on day shift, looked at the call logs, drank half a pot of our coffee, and told me some kid probably found an old unprogrammed fleet radio at the scrap depot. I believed him because there was no reason not to. We don't get organized crime up here. We get broken axles, frozen pipes, and bar fights at the Legion. Then, the weekend before Valentine's Day, a woman called at 3:18 a.m. reporting a smell of natural gas behind the old community arena on Becker Road. I patched the volunteer fire chief on his pager and sent 2 guys out in the tanker. 10 minutes later, another call came in from the opposite end of town. A downed cable across the service road by the hydro sub. Both turned out to be nothing. No gas leak, no cable on the snow. Just tire tracks where someone had pulled in, turned around, and driven off. The next night, it happened again. 3:35 a.m. A broken window at the municipal garage. When the patrol car drove over to check, the garage was locked and intact, but the constable radioed in that the intersection light at 631 had been covered with a black contractor bag. I sat at the console looking at the screen. I started pulling the raw audio logs from the bell trunk, going back 3 weeks. That was when the numbers stopped sounding like utility tags. The calls were short, 5 seconds each, always from unlisted VoIP blocks routing through a server in Thunder Bay. But if you lined up the timestamps with our shift logs, the pattern wasn't random. 42 First Avenue, North Gate. That call came in 12 minutes before an ambulance was dispatched to First Avenue for a medical transfer. 16 Meadow, delay 8. That one logged exactly 8 minutes before the OPP cruiser left the detachment for a routine property check. They weren't prank calls. They were timing our response corridors. Every single call over the last month had pulled an emergency vehicle to a specific corner of town, and someone with a stopwatch had sat in the dark measuring how long it took our volunteers to put their boots on, start the truck, and clear the snowbanks. They were mapping the dead zones where radio reception drops between the ridges, and they were doing it using our own dispatch logs. I called the detachment supervisor at home at 4:10 4:10 a.m. I told him what the logs looked like. He listened for about 2 minutes, told me I was staring at the CAD screen too long, and said we'd look at the server logs on Monday when the district IT guy came up from Sault Ste. Marie. He told me to log the false alarms under municipal mischief and stop overthinking dead air. At 3:47 a.m., the board lit up again. The line showed no caller ID, just the internal trunk designation, line 2. I picked up the headset and gave the standard opening. There was no sound of wind this time. No engine idle in the background. Just a clear indoor line, so quiet I could hear the faint click of a keyboard on the other end. A man's voice spoke, very level, completely conversational. Dispatcher 3. Shift ends at 6. Backdoor deadbolt sticks on the latch. Then the line cut. I didn't answer. I didn't hit the intercom. I sat in that swivel chair, staring at the green text cursor blinking on the monitor. The back exit of our annex opens into the unlit equipment yard behind Public Works. The deadbolt had been swollen in the frame since the first freeze in November. Only 3 people worked the dispatch desk, and none of us had filed a maintenance ticket for it because we just used the side door by the plow bays. I pulled up the external camera feed on the secondary monitor. It's an old analog lens pointed at the gate, coated in salt spray and grain. Out by the access road, past the high snow berms where the plow clears the lot, an idling dark pickup sat with its running lights killed. Just the faint steam coming from the tailpipe into the freezing air. I didn't pick up the radio. If they were listening to our response times, they were sitting on the scanner frequency. I picked up my personal cell phone to dial the OPP direct line, but the screen had no bars. The small cell booster on the annex roof had dropped to 0. The power light on the wall unit blinking a steady, slow amber. 10 minutes later, the truck backed slowly out into the tree line and disappeared down the unplowed secondary road toward the highway. I gave my 2 weeks notice the following Tuesday. I told them my mother was sick down in Sudbury. The detachment supervisor never pulled those IT logs. When the replacement dispatcher took over my rotation, she told me the weird dead air calls had completely stopped the day after I handed in my letter. I still have a spreadsheet on an old thumb drive where I copied the last 4 weeks of timestamps before they wiped the server for the spring migration. There are 26 calls logged in that file for locations outside our municipal boundary, addresses that don't belong to Hornepayne, but match the exact road grid of 3 other isolated towns along Highway 11. Nobody in those towns has filed a report. As far as the provincial dispatch records show, they've just had an unusually high number of false alarms this winter.